It's time for cookies and crime. This is the case of Ted Bundy, another notorious serial killer in the U.S. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Caldwell on November 24, 1946, to Eleanor Louise Caldwell at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His father's identity remains unconfirmed, and this would bother Bundy for a while. In his early years, Bundy was raised by his maternal grandparents. They raised him as their son to avoid the social stigma that accompanied birth outside of wedlock at the time. Friends and family around him claimed that his mother was his older sister. Once he found out the truth, he became resentful toward his mother. Bundy would occasionally show signs of disturbing behavior at an early age. One time, his aunt woke up from a nap to find herself surrounded by knives from the kitchen and a 3-year-old Ted standing by the bed, smiling. When he was 4, Ted and his mother moved to Tacoma, Washington. This is where his mother met Johnny Culpepper Bundy, who she married later that year, and Johnny formally adopted Ted. However, he never accepted Johnny as a father figure. In his teenage years, Bundy consumed large quantities of alcohol and roamed around late at night in search of undraped windows, where he could observe women undressing. He also claimed that he had no natural sense of how to develop friendships. Quote, "I didn't know what made people want to be friends. I didn't know what underlay social interactions," unquote. After high school, he went to University of Washington to study Chinese. This is when he also became romantically involved with another classmate, Diane Edwards. He dropped out, and shortly after, Edwards ended their relationship and returned home to her family in California. Psychiatrist Dorothy Lewis would later pinpoint this crisis as probably the pivotal time in his development. In fall of 1969, he met Elizabeth Klopfer. She would play a key part in his eventual arrest. Bundy eventually went back to school and dropped out again. This is when young women began to disappear in the Pacific Northwest. It's unknown when he began killing women, but his first documented homicide was in 1974, when he was 27 years old. Shortly after midnight on January 4th, 1974, Bundy entered the basement apartment of 18-year-old Karen Sparks. He hit her with a metal rod from her bed frame, SA'd her using the same rod that he hit her with. She survived, but was left with physical disabilities. During the first half of 1974, female college students disappeared at the rate of about 1 per month. On March 12th, Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old student at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, left her dorm to attend a jazz concert on campus but never arrived. April 17th, Susan Elaine Rancourt disappeared while on her way to her dorm room at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg. Witnesses saw a man wearing a sling who was asking for help carrying a load of books to his brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. During this period, Bundy was working in Olympia as the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission, where he wrote a pamphlet for women on our prevention. The irony. Later, he worked at the Department of Emergency Services, a state government agency involved in the search for the missing woman. This is also where he met and started dating Carol Ann Boone, in addition to Kopfler. Later that year in August, Bundy moved to Salt Lake City for law school. All of a sudden, in Salt Lake City, young women began disappearing. His common tactics and processes would be seeming helpless to women and asking for their help. He would hit them with something, SA them, and strangle them, and on some occasions, dismember them. In November, Klopfer, back in Seattle, called King County Police in Utah after reading that young women were disappearing in towns surrounding Salt Lake City. By then, the police were already suspicious of Bundy, but some witnesses were unable to identify him in a photo lineup. At this point, there was not enough evidence linking him to the crimes. In January 1975, Bundy returned to Seattle after his final exams and spent a week with Klopfer. He had no idea that she had reported him to the police on 3 separate occasions. Then, on August 16, 1975, Bundy finally gets arrested. But you would be crazy to think that it ends there. He would escape from prison and collect more victims in part 2.